The frozen air bit at my face as I revved the snowmobile engine at 5:30 in the morning, watching my breath create white clouds that disappeared into the darkness of pre-dawn Montana. I had been doing this same routine for 3 winters now, patrolling the backcountry trails around Whitefish before my shift officially started at the Flathead County Sheriff's Department, and nobody had ever complained about it until today. I was just returning from checking on Old Man Henderson's cabin when I saw her standing in my driveway, arms crossed, wearing a puffy pink coat that made her look like an angry marshmallow. The motion sensor light on my garage illuminated her face, which was twisted into an expression of pure indignation. I knew immediately this was going to be trouble. "Excuse me," she shouted over the sound of my idling engine. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" I killed the engine and pulled off my helmet, the sudden silence almost deafening. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I help you with something?" "Help me." Her voice rose an octave. "You can help me by not waking up the entire neighborhood with that monstrosity every single morning. Some of us are trying to sleep." I glanced around at the houses on our street. We lived in Pine Ridge Estates, a development that had sprung up about 5 years ago on the outskirts of Whitefish. The lots were large, at least 2 acres each, specifically because people wanted space and privacy. My nearest neighbor was easily 300 feet away. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you," I said, though I kept my voice level. "But I leave for work early and I need to check the trails before my shift." "I don't care what you need to do," she snapped. The Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association has very clear rules about noise ordinances. Nothing before 7 in the morning on weekdays, 8 on weekends. You're in violation. I studied her more carefully now. She was probably in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had that particular look of someone who had recently discovered a small amount of power and intended to wield it like a weapon. I had been a law enforcement officer for 15 years, and I knew the type well. "I don't think we've met," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Marcus Irving. I've lived here for 3 years." She looked at my hand like I was offering her a dead fish. "Kathleen Harmon. I'm the president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. And I'm telling you right now, this stops immediately or there will be consequences." I lowered my hand. "Mrs. Harmon, I understand your concern, but I'm actually the county sheriff. I patrol these areas as part of my job. There are cabins and properties back in those mountains, and during winter, the snowmobile is the only way to check on them efficiently. I don't care if you're the President of the United States," she said, her face flushing red. "The HOA rules apply to everyone equally. No exceptions." I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I reviewed the HOA covenants when I bought this house. There's nothing in there about snowmobiles or specific noise restrictions beyond reasonable expectations." "Well, there is now," she said triumphantly. "We had a meeting last month and updated the rules. You should have received a copy in your mailbox." I thought about my mailbox, which was usually stuffed with junk mail and the occasional bill. I couldn't remember seeing anything from the HOA, but it was possible I had tossed it without reading it carefully. Still, something about this didn't sit right with me. "How many people were at this meeting?" I asked, her eyes narrowed. "That's none of your concern. The board has the authority to make these decisions. Actually, according to the original covenants, any rule changes require a vote of at least 60% of the homeowners. How many people live in Pine Ridge Estates? About 40 families, right?" She took a step back, her confidence faltering slightly. "The people who care enough to attend the meetings are the ones who get to make the decisions. If others can't be bothered to participate, that's their problem." "That's not how it works," I said. But look, I don't want to argue with you at 5:30 in the morning. How about we table this discussion until later? I need to get ready for my shift." "There's nothing to discuss," she said, recovering her aggressive tone. "You will stop using that snowmobile before 7 in the morning, or I will fine you. $500 per violation." I felt my temper starting to rise, but I kept it in check. You can't just impose fines without following proper procedure. "If you want to pursue this, we can get all the homeowners together and have a proper vote on it." "I don't need to do anything," she said. "The fines start tomorrow. Consider this your official warning." She spun on her heel and marched back toward the street, where I noticed a white Escalade parked at the curb. I watched her drive away, then grabbed my gear and headed inside. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I had bought after my divorce. It was more space than I needed, but I liked having a garage for my vehicles and a yard for my dog, a German Shepherd named Ranger who was currently barking at the door, excited to see me. Yeah, I know," I said, letting him out into the backyard. "We've got a problem, boy." After feeding Ranger and taking a quick shower, I changed into my uniform and headed to the station. It was still dark outside, but the sky was starting to lighten on the eastern horizon. The drive took about 20 minutes, and I used the time to think about Kathleen Harmon and her threats. The Flathead County Sheriff's Department was housed in a modern building just off Highway 93. I parked in my usual spot and headed inside, nodding to Deputy Sarah Chen, who was working the night shift dispatch. "Morning, Sheriff," she said. "Quiet night." "Just a couple of traffic stops and a domestic disturbance call that turned out to be nothing." "Good," I said. "Can you pull up the HOA information for Pine Ridge Estates? I need to see what their legal structure looks like." She raised an eyebrow. "HOA trouble? Potentially," I said. "Just want to make sure I know what I'm dealing with." While Sarah pulled up the records, I went to my office and started going through the morning reports. Nothing major, which was typical for a Monday in January. Whitefish was a beautiful town, popular with tourists who came for the skiing and the scenery, but it was generally peaceful. Most of my work involved routine patrols, responding to minor incidents and maintaining relationships with the various communities in the county. Sarah knocked on my door about 15 minutes later with a printout. "Here's what I found. Pine Ridge Estates HOA was established in 2019. The board consists of a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. There are 42 homes in the development, and according to the bylaws, any changes to the covenants require a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, not just those present at a meeting." I scanned the document, feeling vindicated. So Kathleen Harmon can't just change the rules on her own. "Nope," Sarah said. "She would need at least 28 homeowners to vote in favor of any changes, and looking at the meeting minutes on file with the county, their last meeting had 7 people present." 7 out of 42, I said, shaking my head. "That's not even close to a quorum." "Want me to dig deeper?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let me see if I can handle this informally first, but keep that file handy in case I need it." The rest of my day was routine. I did my regular patrol, checked in with the school resource officer at Whitefish High School, and met with the mayor to discuss budget planning for the next fiscal year. It was after 5 when I finally headed home, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening with Ranger and maybe a beer. That plan evaporated when I pulled into my driveway and saw an official-looking letter taped to my front door. I grabbed it, already knowing what it would say, and I wasn't disappointed. "Notice of violation," it read in bold letters. "Dear Mr. Irving, you are hereby notified that you are in violation of Pine Ridge Estates HOA Covenant Section 7.3, Noise Ordinance. On January 6, 2026, you operated a motorized vehicle, snowmobile, before the permitted hours of 7 o'clock a.m. on weekdays. This constitutes a violation subject to a fine of $500. Payment is due within 30 days. Continued violations will result in additional fines and potential legal action. Sincerely, Kathleen Harmon, HOA President. I stood there for a moment, reading the letter twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. Then I went inside, fed Ranger, and pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. I spent the next hour reading through every page, taking notes, and cross-referencing with the documents Sarah had given me. Section 7.3 did exist, but it had nothing to do with noise ordinances. It was actually about landscaping requirements. The noise section was 9.2, and it only mentioned reasonable noise levels without specifying times or restrictions on specific types of vehicles. I picked up my phone and called Tom Brennan, one of my neighbors who I occasionally had a beer with. He answered on the third ring. "Marcus, hey, what's up?" "Tom, have you been getting letters from the HOA lately?" "Oh God, yeah," he said, groaning. "That Kathleen woman is driving everyone crazy. She moved in about 6 months ago, got herself elected HOA president, and now she acts like she owns the whole neighborhood." "Have there been any actual meetings about rule changes?" "Not that I know of," Tom said. "I got some notice about a meeting back in December, but it was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Most of us work, you know. I heard maybe 5 or 6 people showed up, and they were all Kathleen's friends from her church or something." "Did you vote for her as president?" "Hell no," Tom said. "There wasn't even really an election. The old president, Mike Santos, moved to Florida, and Kathleen just kind of stepped in and declared herself in charge. Nobody paid much attention because the HOA had been pretty much inactive for years. Mike just organized the Christmas party and made sure everyone paid their dues for snow plowing the main road." "This is helpful," I said. "Thanks, Tom. Are you having trouble with her too? She's threatening to fine me for using my snowmobile early in the morning." Tom laughed. "Join the club. She fined the Johnsons $300 because their trash cans were visible from the street. They're the kind that sit in a little fence enclosure, but apparently that's not good enough for Queen Kathleen." After hanging up with Tom, I made a few more calls to other neighbors. The picture that emerged was consistent. Kathleen Harmon had essentially taken over the HOA through a combination of aggressive personality and the apathy of most homeowners who just wanted to be left alone. She had been issuing fines and making threats, but as far as I could tell, nobody had actually paid anything yet. The next morning, I made a point of leaving at exactly the same time, 5:30, and taking the same route on my snowmobile. The sun wouldn't rise for another hour, but I had work to do. There were 3 elderly residents who lived year-round in cabins up in the mountains, and I made it a point to check on them regularly during winter. If something happened to one of them, it could be days before anyone noticed if I wasn't doing these patrols. I was checking on Bill Patterson's place when I got a call on my radio from Deputy Chen. "Sheriff, we've got a situation at your address." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of situation?" "A Kathleen Harmon called in a noise complaint. She's demanding we send someone to cite you for disturbing the peace." I closed my eyes and counted to 10. "Tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Will do. But Sheriff, she's being pretty aggressive. She's threatened to call the state police if we don't take action." "Let her," I said. "I'll handle it." I finished my patrol, making sure Bill was okay and had enough supplies, then headed back down the mountain. By the time I got to my street, the sun was just starting to peek over the Whitefish Range, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. Kathleen was standing in my driveway again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought two other women with her, both around her age, both wearing nearly identical puffy coats and expressions of righteous indignation. I parked the snowmobile in my garage and walked over to them, still wearing my helmet and winter gear. "Good morning, Mrs. Harmon," I said. "I see you brought friends." "These are my fellow HOA board members," she said. "This is Linda Morrison, our secretary, and Patricia Webb, our treasurer. We're here to formally document your continued violation of HOA rules." "I see," I said. "And you're aware that the rules you're citing don't actually exist in the legally binding covenants. We amended them," Kathleen said. "I showed you the documentation yesterday." "No, you told me about a meeting that 7 people attended. That's not a legal amendment." "You need a 2/3 vote of all 42 homeowners." Linda, the secretary, shifted uncomfortably. "Kathleen said we could make operational changes without a full vote." "She's wrong," I said flatly. "And I'm not paying any fines based on rules that weren't legally enacted." "Then we'll take you to court," Kathleen said, her voice rising. "We'll put a lien on your property. We'll make your life miserable until you comply." I took off my helmet and looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Harmon, I've been patient with you, but you need to understand something. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not violating any valid HOA rules. What I am doing is my job as county sheriff, which includes checking on residents in remote areas during winter months. If you try to interfere with that, you're going to have a problem." "Are you threatening me?" she demanded. "No, I'm explaining reality to you. You can't fine people based on rules you made up. You can't put liens on property without proper legal authority, and you definitely can't interfere with law enforcement activities." Patricia, the treasurer, spoke up for the first time. "Kathleen, maybe we should consult with a lawyer before we go any further." "We don't need a lawyer," Kathleen snapped. "We have authority as the HOA board." "Actually, you might want to listen to Patricia," I said. "Because if you keep pushing this, I'm going to call an emergency meeting of all the homeowners and have you removed from the board." "You can't do that," Kathleen said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Yes, I can. Any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence in the board. And given that you've been harassing people with fake fines, I'm pretty sure I can get the votes I need." I left them standing in my driveway and went inside. Through the window, I watched them have a heated discussion, with Kathleen gesturing wildly while Linda and Patricia looked increasingly uncomfortable. After about 5 minutes, they got into Kathleen's Escalade and drove away. I thought that might be the end of it, but I should have known better. Over the next week, things escalated. I continued my morning patrols, and Kathleen continued to document each one. She started leaving notices on other people's doors too, fining them for various imaginary infractions. Tom got hit with a $500 fine for parking his boat in his driveway. The Martinez family got fined because their kids' play structure was allegedly too close to the property line. The elderly couple at the end of the street got cited because their lawn ornaments were not aesthetically pleasing. People started calling me, not as the sheriff but as a neighbor, asking what they should do. I told everyone the same thing. Don't pay the fines, keep documentation of everything, and show up to the emergency meeting I was organizing. I sent out notices to all 42 households, scheduling the meeting for a Saturday afternoon at the community center. I made sure to follow every procedural requirement in the HOA bylaws, including giving 2 weeks' notice and providing a clear agenda. Kathleen, of course, responded by sending out her own letter, claiming my meeting was invalid and that anyone who attended would be subject to fines. That backfired spectacularly because it just made people angry. During those 2 weeks, I did some digging into Kathleen's background. It wasn't hard. Most of the information was publicly available. What I found was interesting. She had been the president of an HOA in Bozeman before moving to Whitefish. That HOA had eventually voted her out after she was caught embezzling funds. Nothing criminal had been filed, probably because they just wanted her gone, but the incident was documented in court records from a civil lawsuit. I also discovered that she had been fining people in Pine Ridge estates for about 3 months, claiming the money was going into an HOA reserve fund. But when I checked the HOA's bank records, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners, I found that the balance hadn't increased at all. In fact, it had decreased. The Saturday of the meeting was clear and cold, with bright sunshine sparkling off the snow. I arrived at the community center early to set up chairs and make coffee. By the time 2 o'clock rolled around, 37 of the 42 households were represented. That was the most people I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Kathleen arrived with Linda and Patricia, plus 2 other people I didn't recognize. She tried to take control of the meeting immediately, standing at the front of the room and demanding everyone's attention. "This meeting is not officially sanctioned," she announced. "Any votes taken here will be invalid." Tom Brennan stood up. "Sit down, Kathleen. Marcus followed the bylaws exactly. You're the one who's been making up rules." "I am the president of this HOA," she said, her face flushing. "You will show me respect." "Respect is earned," someone else called out. "And you haven't earned anything except our anger." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Okay, everyone, let's keep this civil. We're here to address some concerns about how the HOA has been managed. Mrs. Harmon, you're welcome to stay and participate, but I'm running this meeting according to the bylaws." She glared at me but sat down in the front row, arms crossed. I went through the agenda systematically. First, I explained the issue with the fake fines and the invalid rule changes. Then I invited anyone who had been affected to share their experiences. Nearly half the room raised their hands. Tom went first, describing the fine he received for parking his boat in his own driveway. "I've been parking my boat there every summer for 3 years," he said. "Nobody ever complained before." Maria Martinez spoke about the fine for her kids' play structure. "We had it professionally installed, and we made sure it was at least 15 feet from the property line, which is what the covenants require." Kathleen said it needed to be 25 feet, but that's not in the rules anywhere. Person after person stood up with similar stories. Some had been fined multiple times. One family had received over $2,000 in fines for various minor issues. Throughout all of this, Kathleen sat in her chair, her expression growing darker. Finally, she stood up. "You're all making a huge mistake," she said. "I've been trying to maintain property values and keep this neighborhood nice. If you remove me, this place will turn into a slum." "We're not a slum," Tom said. "We're a neighborhood of people who want to be left alone to enjoy our homes." "I move that we vote to remove Kathleen Harmon as HOA president," I said. "And that we also remove Linda Morrison and Patricia Webb from their positions, since they've been complicit in these actions." Linda stood up quickly. "I'd like to say something. I never wanted to be part of this. Kathleen is my neighbor, and she asked me to help out. I didn't know she was making up rules. I just took notes at meetings like she told me to." Patricia nodded. "Same here. I'm the treasurer, but Kathleen never let me see the bank statements. She said she'd handle it." That got everyone's attention. I looked at Kathleen. "You're the only one with access to the HOA bank account. As president, that's my responsibility," she said defensively. "Actually, according to the bylaws, the treasurer is supposed to have access and provide quarterly reports to all homeowners." Patricia, When's the last time you saw a bank statement? Never, she said quietly. Kathleen said she'd get me access, but she never did. I pulled out the bank records I had obtained through my own investigation. I did some checking. The HOA account currently has $1,800 in it. But according to my calculations, based on the annual dues everyone pays, it should have at least $10,000. Where's the rest of the money, Kathleen? The room went completely silent. Everyone was staring at Kathleen, who had gone pale. That's none of your business, she said. Those records are confidential. No, they're not, I said. Every homeowner has the right to review the HOA's financial records, and I'm asking you again, where is the money? She grabbed her purse and stood up. I don't have to listen to this. You're all going to regret this when your property values plummet. Sit down, Mrs. Harmon, I said, and this time I used my sheriff's voice. We're not done here. She hesitated, then sat back down, but I could see her hands shaking. I turned to the room. I think we need to do more than just remove the current board. We need to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances. I'd like to motion that we suspend all HOA activities except for essential services, like snow plowing, until we can get a clear picture of what's been happening with our money. The motion passed unanimously, with only Kathleen and her two friends abstaining. Then we voted on removing Kathleen from the board. It wasn't even close. 35 in favor, 2 opposed, and 5 abstentions. Kathleen stood up again, her face red with anger and what might have been shame. You're all going to hear from my lawyer, she said. This is illegal. You can't just remove me without cause. We have plenty of cause, Tom said. And if you really did steal HOA funds, you're going to have bigger problems than being voted out. She stormed out of the community center, with her two friends trailing behind her. The rest of us spent another hour organizing a new board, with Tom agreeing to serve as temporary president until we could hold proper elections. We also appointed a 3-person committee to audit the finances and report back. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me. I'm glad you stood up to her, Maria Martinez said. She's been making everyone miserable. Just doing what needed to be done, I said. Nobody should have to put up with that kind of harassment. I drove home feeling satisfied that we had resolved the situation, but a nagging doubt remained in my mind. Kathleen had been too confident, even when confronted with evidence of wrongdoing. That usually meant she had something else planned. I found out what it was on Monday morning. I was at the station, going through paperwork, when my secretary buzzed me. Sheriff, there's a man here from the Montana Attorney General's office. He says he needs to speak with you. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach. Send him in. The man who entered my office was in his 40s, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. He introduced himself as Robert Chen, an investigator with the AG's office. Sheriff Irving, I'm here about a complaint we received regarding your conduct as an HOA board member. I blinked. I'm not on the HOA board. I just organized a meeting to remove someone who was abusing their authority. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. According to the complaint filed by Kathleen Harmon, you used your position as county sheriff to intimidate and threaten HOA board members. She's alleging abuse of power and possibly corruption. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. That's completely false. I acted as a homeowner, not as sheriff. The only thing I did was follow the HOA's own bylaws to call a meeting and vote her out. She claims you used your access to law enforcement databases to dig up personal information about her. I used publicly available court records to research her background after she started making threats. That's not illegal, and it's not abuse of power. Robert nodded, making notes. I understand, but you can see how this looks. a sheriff using his position to settle a personal dispute. It wasn't a personal dispute, I said firmly. She was harassing dozens of families with fake fines and possibly embezzling HOA funds. I did what any homeowner would do. I organized the community to address the problem. About the embezzlement allegation, Robert said. Do you have evidence of that? I pulled out my own file and handed it to him. Bank statements showing a significant shortfall in the HOA account. Records of fines that Kathleen claimed she was collecting, but that never appeared in the deposits. We've appointed an audit committee to investigate further. He reviewed the documents carefully. This is interesting. Have you filed a formal complaint with law enforcement? Not yet. I wanted to wait for the audit results. But if the evidence supports it, yes. I'll be referring it to the state police to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. Robert spent another 30 minutes interviewing me, going over every detail of my interactions with Kathleen. When he finally closed his briefcase, he looked thoughtful. Off the record, Sheriff, this looks like a retaliatory complaint from someone who got caught doing something wrong, but I still have to investigate it thoroughly. Try to avoid any further contact with Mrs. Harmon if you can. That's my plan, I said. After he left, I sat in my office, staring at the wall. This was exactly the kind of situation I had hoped to avoid. Even though I had done nothing wrong, the mere existence of an investigation would raise questions and potentially damage my reputation. I called Tom Brennan and filled him in on what had happened. That woman is unbelievable, Tom said. She creates a mess, gets caught, and then tries to blame you for exposing her. That's pretty standard behavior for people like her, I said, but we need to be careful. Let the audit committee do their work and make sure everything is documented properly. If there's evidence of embezzlement, we'll turn it over to the state police. I'll talk to the committee, Tom said. We're meeting with the bank tomorrow to get complete records. Over the next 2 weeks, the audit committee did their work. What they found was worse than I had expected. Kathleen had been systematically skimming money from the HOA account for months. She had written checks to herself for administrative expenses that were never approved by the board. She had created fake invoices from contractors who never did any work. In total, she had taken nearly $12,000. The committee presented their findings at another homeowner meeting, this time with even better attendance. The evidence was damning: canceled checks, forged signatures, fake invoices. Everything was documented in a detailed report. We need to turn this over to law enforcement, Tom said. This is clear-cut embezzlement. I stood up. I'm going to recuse myself from this. Given that I'm the county sheriff and I live in this community, there's a conflict of interest. I'll refer this to the Montana State Police, and they can handle the investigation. Everyone agreed that was the right approach. I made the call that afternoon, speaking with Detective Lisa Warner from the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. She agreed to take the case and came to Whitefish the next day to interview witnesses and collect evidence. While that investigation was ongoing, I continued my normal duties, including my early morning snowmobile patrols. Nobody complained anymore. In fact, several neighbors had thanked me for what I was doing, saying they felt safer knowing someone was checking on the remote properties. About a month after the state police got involved, Detective Warner called me. Sheriff Irving, I wanted to give you an update. We've completed our investigation, and we're moving forward with charges against Kathleen Harmon. Embezzlement, forgery, and fraud. The evidence your audit committee gathered was excellent, really made our job easier. That's good to hear, I said. What's the timeline? We'll be arresting her tomorrow. I wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries to cause more trouble for you. I appreciate that, I said. The arrest happened the next morning. I wasn't involved, which was appropriate given my conflict of interest, but word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Kathleen was taken into custody without incident, and she was arraigned that afternoon. The judge set bail at $50,000, which she posted by evening. I thought that would be the end of my involvement, but Kathleen had one more card to play. 2 days after her arrest, I was doing my morning patrol when I got a call from Deputy Chen. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. Kathleen Harmon is at your house. She's blocking your driveway with her car and refusing to move." I felt a surge of frustration. "I'm about 15 minutes out. Can you send someone to deal with it?" "Already did. Deputy Rodriguez is on scene, but she's asking for you specifically." I finished my patrol and headed back down the mountain. When I got to my street, I could see Kathleen's Escalade parked sideways across my driveway, and Deputy Mike Rodriguez standing next to it, talking to Kathleen through the window. I parked my snowmobile on the street and walked over. Kathleen got out of her car as soon as she saw me. "You've ruined my life," she said, and I could see tears streaming down her face. "I'm going to lose my house. My husband left me. My kids won't talk to me, all because you couldn't let me do my job." I felt a flash of sympathy, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what she had done. "Mrs. Harmon, you made your own choices. You stole money from your neighbors. You harassed people with fake fines. You tried to abuse your authority." "I was trying to make the neighborhood better," she said. "I was trying to maintain standards. By stealing from people, by making up rules, that's not maintaining standards, that's just bullying." She wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheeks. "I needed the money. My husband lost his job and we were behind on our mortgage. I was going to pay it back." "That doesn't make it right," I said. "And you know that." Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward. "Madam, you need to move your vehicle. You're blocking private property." She looked at me for a long moment, then got back in her car. Before she drove away, she rolled down the window. "I hope you're happy, Sheriff. You got what you wanted." I watched her drive away, feeling no satisfaction at all. "Mike, make sure she gets home okay, but if she comes back here, arrest her for trespassing." "Will do, Sheriff." I went inside and sat down at my kitchen table. Ranger came over and put his head on my knee, sensing my mood. I scratched behind his ears and thought about everything that had happened. The truth was, I didn't feel happy. I felt tired. Dealing with Kathleen had been exhausting, and the whole situation had created stress and division in a neighborhood that had been peaceful. But I also knew that letting her continue would have been worse. Over the next few months, things slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected a new board, with Tom as president and several other level-headed neighbors in supporting roles. They immediately voted to scale back the HOA's activities to just the essentials: maintaining the entrance, organizing the annual Christmas party, and coordinating snow plowing. Kathleen's criminal case moved through the court system. She eventually pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving a sentence of 3 years probation and an order to pay restitution to the HOA. Her husband did file for divorce, and she ended up selling her house and moving away from Whitefish. The investigation by the Attorney General's office into my conduct concluded with no findings of wrongdoing. Robert Chen called to tell me personally that they had determined I had acted appropriately as a homeowner and had not abused my authority as sheriff. Life in Pine Ridge Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued my early morning patrols, checking on the elderly residents in the mountains and making sure the backcountry was safe. Nobody complained about the noise. One morning, about 6 months after the whole situation with Kathleen had ended, I was returning from my patrol when I saw Tom standing in his driveway, drinking coffee. "Morning, Marcus," he called out. Got time for a cup? I parked my snowmobile and walked over. Sure. We sat on his porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The air was crisp and clean, and the world was peaceful. I've been meaning to thank you, Tom said, for everything you did with the HOA situation. A lot of people were too intimidated to stand up to Kathleen, but you didn't back down. Just did what needed to be done, I said. Nobody should have to live in fear of their HOA. True enough, he said. But still, we're lucky to have you as a neighbor and as sheriff. I sipped my coffee and looked out at the mountains. This was why I had moved to Montana, why I had chosen law enforcement as a career. It wasn't about power or authority, it was about helping people and making communities better. Thanks, Tom, I said. That means a lot. As I drove to work later that morning, I thought about how the situation with Kathleen could have gone differently. If I had just paid her fake fines and kept quiet, maybe she would have left me alone. But dozens of other people would have continued to suffer, and she would have kept stealing from the community. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do. You stand up, even when it's uncomfortable. You follow the rules, even when others don't. And you protect your community, whether that's from criminals or from petty tyrants who abuse their tiny slice of authority. The weeks turned into months, and Pine Ridge Estates thrived under its new, minimalist HOA approach. Property values actually increased, not because of strict rules and enforcement, but because people were happy to live there. Word spread that it was a neighborhood where people were left alone to enjoy their homes, and several houses sold quickly when they went on the market. I continued my work as sheriff, handling everything from minor disputes to serious crimes. The early morning patrols became something I looked forward to, a peaceful time before the demands of the day began. Bill Patterson and the other mountain residents appreciated the regular check-ins, especially during the harsh winter months. One particular morning in late February, I was checking on Bill's cabin when I found him outside, struggling to clear snow from his roof. He was 78 years old and had no business being up on a ladder in the snow. "Bill, get down from there," I called out. "I'll help you." "I can handle it," he said stubbornly, but I could see he was breathing hard. I spent the next hour helping him clear the snow, making sure his cabin was secure for the storm that was forecast to arrive that evening. As we finished, he invited me in for coffee. "You're a good man, Marcus," he said, pouring 2 cups of strong black coffee. "Not many sheriffs would take the time to check on an old man like me." "It's part of the job," I said. "Besides, I enjoy getting out in the backcountry, beats sitting behind a desk." "I heard about that trouble you had with your HOA," he said. "Woman sounds like she was a real piece of work." "She was complicated," I said, "made some bad choices." "That's charitable of you," Bill said. "Most people would just call her a crook." "She was that too," I admitted, "but I think she started with good intentions and then let power go to her head. Plus, she was in a desperate financial situation. Doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "That's the thing about people. They're rarely just one thing. Even the bad ones usually have some reason for what they do." We talked for a while longer, and then I headed back down the mountain. The conversation with Bill stayed with me, though. He was right that Kathleen had been more than just a villain. She had been a desperate person who made terrible choices, and while she had to face the consequences, I could still feel some sympathy for her situation. When I got back to town, I stopped by the station to check in. Sarah Chen met me at the door. "Sheriff, you've got a visitor." "She's been waiting for about 30 minutes. "Who is it?" "Linda Morrison. She said it's about the HOA." I felt a flutter of concern. Linda had been Kathleen's secretary on the board, though she had cooperated fully with the investigation and hadn't been charged with anything. I found her in my office, sitting nervously in one of the chairs. She stood up when I entered. "Sheriff Irving, thank you for seeing me." "Of course. What can I do for you, Linda?" She twisted her hands together. "I wanted to apologize for everything that happened with Kathleen. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was afraid of her. She could be very intimidating." "You did speak up when it mattered," I said. "At the meeting, you told the truth about what was happening. That took courage." "I still feel guilty," she said. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to make waves. And because of that, Kathleen was able to steal from people for months longer than she should have. I leaned back in my chair. "Linda, we all make mistakes. What matters is that you did the right thing eventually." "Have you talked to Kathleen since her arrest?" She nodded. "Once. She called me crying, saying I had betrayed her, but I didn't betray her. I just told the truth." "That's exactly right, and you should be proud of that." She smiled weakly. "Thank you, Sheriff. I also wanted you to know that I'm moving. My husband got a job in Helena and we're leaving Whitefish next month." "I'm sorry to hear that. You're a good neighbor." "Thank you. But honestly, after everything that happened, I think a fresh start will be good for us." Every time I drive past Kathleen's old house, I feel uncomfortable. After Linda left, I sat in my office thinking about the ripple effects of Kathleen's actions. It wasn't just the money she had stolen or the fake fines she had imposed. She had created an atmosphere of fear and mistrust that had damaged the community in ways that would take time to heal. Linda was leaving because of it. Other people had probably been affected in ways I didn't even know about. That evening, I decided to take Ranger for a walk around the neighborhood. It was something I did regularly, not as sheriff, but just as a resident. I waved to people working in their yards, stopped to chat with neighbors I ran into, and just generally tried to be a visible, friendly presence. As I walked past the house that had belonged to Kathleen, I saw that it had a "sold" sign in the yard. A young couple was outside, measuring the windows for curtains. They waved to me and I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates," I said. "I'm Marcus Irving. I live a few houses down." "Nice to meet you," the man said, shaking my hand. "I'm David Chen and this is my wife, Amy. We're moving in next week." "Great," I said. "It's a good neighborhood, quiet, friendly people." "That's what we heard," Amy said. "The realtor told us there had been some HOA drama, but that it was all resolved now." "It is," I said. "We've got a new board that keeps things simple. As long as you maintain your property and don't do anything too crazy, nobody will bother you." David laughed. "That sounds perfect. We're tired of apartment living and just want a place where we can relax." As I continued my walk, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Life was moving on. The drama with Kathleen was becoming just a story, something that had happened but was now in the past. New people were moving in, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. Over the summer, Pine Ridge Estates hosted its first major community event under the new board, a 4th of July barbecue. Nearly everyone attended, gathering at the community center with food and drinks. Kids ran around playing, adults chatted and laughed, and for a few hours, we were just neighbors enjoying each other's company. Tom gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their patience during the difficult period with the previous board. "We've learned some valuable lessons," he said. "The most important one is that an HOA should serve the community, not control it. We're here to handle the basics and stay out of your way otherwise." That got a round of applause and some cheers. Later, as I was grilling hamburgers, David and Amy came over. "This is great," David said. "We never had anything like this at our old apartment complex." "It's one of the benefits of a smaller community," I said. People actually get to know each other. We heard you were the one who stood up to the old HOA president, Amy said. That must have been difficult. It had its moments, I admitted, but it needed to be done. Someone had to say enough is enough. Well, we're grateful, David said. We almost didn't buy the house because of the HOA horror stories we read online. But then we learned what happened and how it was resolved, and we felt confident moving forward. As summer turned to fall, I reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. The neighborhood was healthier, the HOA was functioning properly, and people seemed genuinely happy. The lessons learned from the situation with Kathleen had made the community stronger. My job as sheriff continued to be busy but rewarding. I handled everything from traffic enforcement to investigating property crimes to mediating disputes. The early morning snowmobile patrols resumed when winter returned, and this time, nobody complained. In fact, several neighbors had asked me to check on their properties when they were traveling, knowing I would be out in the backcountry anyway. One snowy morning in December, almost a year after my first confrontation with Kathleen, I was starting my patrol when Tom called out to me from his driveway. "Marcus, hold on a second." I idled the snowmobile and pulled up my helmet visor. "What's up, Tom?" He walked over, holding an envelope. "The HOA wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it's a token of our appreciation." I opened the envelope and found a gift card to a local restaurant, along with a card signed by what looked like every household in the neighborhood. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "We wanted to," Tom said. "You put yourself on the line for this community. You dealt with Kathleen's crazy, you handled the investigation, and you never asked for anything in return. That's the kind of neighbor we want to recognize." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks, Tom. This means a lot." As I headed up into the mountains, I thought about how lucky I was. Not just because of the gift card or the recognition, but because I lived in a place where people cared about each other, where neighbors looked out for one another, where doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was appreciated. I checked on Bill Patterson first, finding him in good spirits and well-stocked for the winter. Then I swung by the other cabins, making sure everyone was safe and had what they needed. The sun was just starting to rise as I made my way back down, painting the snow-covered peaks in brilliant shades of orange and pink. When I got home, I took a moment before going inside to just stand in my driveway and look around. This was my neighborhood. These were my neighbors. And despite all the drama and difficulty, or maybe because of it, we had built something worth protecting. The story of Kathleen and the HOA became something of a legend in Whitefish. People who didn't even live in Pine Ridge estates knew about it, often bringing it up when HOA horror stories were discussed. But it wasn't told as a cautionary tale about HOAs in general. Instead, it became a story about standing up for what's right, about communities coming together to solve problems, and about how even small-scale corruption could be challenged and overcome. As for me, I continued doing what I had always done, my job as sheriff and my duties as a neighbor. The early morning patrols remained a constant, a peaceful time to check on people and enjoy the beauty of the Montana backcountry. No one ever complained about the noise again. Years later, when I would look back on that period, I would remember not just the conflict but the resolution. I would remember neighbors coming together, people standing up for each other, and a community becoming stronger through adversity. Those were the things that mattered, the things that made all the difficulty worthwhile. And every morning, as I fired up the snowmobile and headed into the mountains, I was reminded of why I had chosen this life, this job, this community. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. That was the real lesson from the whole situation with Kathleen and the HOA. Not that people can be difficult, or that power can corrupt, but that communities can overcome challenges when people are willing to stand up and do what's right. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked into my house after another morning patrol. Ranger greeted me enthusiastically, and I could already smell the coffee I had set to brew before I left. It was going to be a good day. They almost always were, now that the drama was behind us and life in Pine Ridge Estates had returned to normal. Looking back, I realized that everything that happened with Kathleen had taught me valuable lessons about leadership, community, and the importance of standing firm when principles were at stake. As a sheriff, I dealt with conflicts and difficult people regularly. But as a homeowner and neighbor, the situation had been different. It had been personal in a way that my professional duties rarely were. The key had been treating it not as a personal attack, but as a community problem that required a community solution. By organizing the other homeowners, documenting everything properly, and following the established procedures, we had been able to resolve the situation legally and permanently. If I had just reacted emotionally or tried to use my authority as sheriff to intimidate Kathleen, it would have backfired. Instead, by acting as a concerned homeowner who happened to have some knowledge of legal procedures, I had been able to help the community help itself. That was the best kind of leadership, not imposing solutions from above, but empowering people to solve their own problems. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, I transitioned from snowmobile patrols to hiking and occasionally driving my truck up the mountain roads that became passable again. The rhythm of checking on the remote properties continued, just with different transportation. Bill Patterson invited me to go fishing one afternoon in May, and we spent a pleasant few hours at a mountain lake, catching rainbow trout and talking about life. He told me stories about his years working as a logger, about the changes he had seen in Montana over his lifetime, and about why he had chosen to retire to a remote cabin instead of moving to a city where services and medical care would be more accessible. "I need the space," he explained. "Need to be able to walk outside and not see another soul if I don't want to. That's worth more to me than convenience." I understood completely. That was part of why I had moved to Montana too, why I had chosen a career in a rural county instead of taking a job with a big city police department. Some people needed the energy and excitement of urban life. Others, like Bill and me, needed the peace and space of wild country. As we packed up our fishing gear, Bill said, "You know, Marcus, I'm glad you're the one doing these patrols. Some sheriffs would just do the minimum, maybe fly over in a helicopter once a month. But you come up here regularly, you check on people, you take the time to talk. That matters to us old-timers." "It's no trouble," I said. "I enjoy it." "I know you do," he said. "That's what makes you good at your job. You care." The conversation stayed with me on the drive back down the mountain. Caring was important, maybe the most important quality for someone in my position. Technical skills and knowledge of the law were necessary, but they weren't enough. You had to genuinely care about the people you served, had to be willing to go beyond the minimum requirements of the job. That's what had motivated me to stand up to Kathleen, even though it would have been easier to just pay her fake fines and avoid the conflict. I cared about my neighbors and didn't want to see them harassed and cheated. And that's what motivated me to continue the early morning patrols, even though they weren't technically required and took time away from my personal life. As summer progressed, Pine Ridge Estates continued to thrive. The HOA board organized a neighborhood garage sale, a back-to-school picnic, and planning for the annual Christmas party. These were simple events, but they brought people together and fostered a sense of community that had been missing during Kathleen's reign. I ran into Patricia Webb one day at the grocery store, She had been the treasurer on Kathleen's board, though like Linda, she hadn't been involved in the embezzlement. "Sheriff Irving," she said, looking nervous, "I've been meaning to thank you for handling that whole situation with Kathleen the way you did." "You're welcome," I said. "How have you been?" "Better," she said. "I felt terrible about what happened. I should have paid more attention to what Kathleen was doing." "You weren't responsible for her choices," I said. "And you did the right thing when you found out what was happening." "I hope so," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I appreciated how you handled it. You could have been vindictive or used your position to make things worse for her, but you didn't. You just focused on protecting the community." After we parted ways, I thought about what she had said. It was true that I could have made things harder for Kathleen. I could have used my law enforcement connections to make sure she faced maximum penalties, but that wouldn't have served any purpose. The goal hadn't been punishment. It had been protection and restitution. Kathleen was paying back the money she had stolen, and she was on probation. Those were appropriate consequences for what she had done. Anything more would have just been revenge, and revenge wasn't justice. As fall arrived again, marking more than a year since the resolution of the HOA conflict, I took stock of where things stood. The neighborhood was peaceful and prosperous. The HOA functioned smoothly with minimal interference in people's lives. Property values had increased. New families had moved in, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. Most importantly, people seemed happy. They enjoyed their homes and their neighborhood. They looked out for each other without being intrusive. They participated in community events because they wanted to, not because they were required to. That was what a healthy HOA looked like, I realized. It wasn't about control or enforcement. It was about facilitating community and handling necessary shared services. Everything else was just noise. One evening in October, I was sitting on my back deck, watching the sunset and throwing a tennis ball for Ranger when my phone rang. It was Tom. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up. Kathleen called me today." I felt my stomach tighten. What did she want? "She's finished her community service and paid back most of the restitution. She wanted to know if there would be any objection to her attending the Christmas party." I was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What did you tell her?" I said I'd have to check with the board and get back to her. "What do you think?" "It's not my decision," I said. "It's up to the community. But personally, I don't have any objection. She paid her debt. If she wants to attend a public event, that's her right." "That's what I thought you'd say," Tom said. "I'll put it to the board, but I think we'll probably tell her she's welcome. It's been over a year. Time to move on." After hanging up, I thought about Kathleen and wondered how she was doing. I hadn't heard anything about her since she moved away. Part of me hoped she had learned from the experience and was making better choices now. Another part of me didn't really care, as long as she stayed away from Pine Ridge Estates. But if she wanted to attend the Christmas party, I wouldn't object. Forgiveness was important, even if forgetting wasn't possible. The Christmas party arrived on a cold, clear December evening. The community center was decorated with lights and garland, and families gathered with food and presents for the gift exchange. I arrived with a plate of cookies and a donation for the food drive we were doing for the local shelter. I scanned the crowd but didn't see Kathleen. Maybe she had decided not to come after all. I found myself feeling slightly relieved. But about an hour into the party, the door opened and she walked in. She looked different, thinner and older somehow, with her hair cut shorter and styled differently. She stood just inside the doorway, looking uncertain as conversation around her died down. Tom walked over to greet her. "Kathleen, glad you could make it. There's food over there and drinks in the kitchen." She smiled nervously. "Thank you, Tom. I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." "It's Christmas," he said. "Everyone's welcome." Slowly, Conversation resumed, though I noticed people watching Kathleen warily as she got a plate of food and found a seat in the corner. She sat alone, eating quietly and looking uncomfortable. I debated whether to go talk to her, then decided I should. Whatever had happened between us, leaving her sitting alone and isolated seemed cruel. "Evening, Kathleen," I said, sitting down next to her. She looked up, surprised. "Sheriff Irving, I didn't expect you to talk to me." "It's Christmas," I said, echoing Tom's words. "How have you been?" "Surviving," she said. "I got a job at a call center in Kalispell. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work. I'm living in a small apartment and driving a used Honda instead of an Escalade." "I'm glad you're back on your feet," I said, and I meant it. "I wanted to apologize," she said, looking down at her plate, "for everything. For the way I treated you and everyone else, for stealing, for lying. I was in a bad place, but that doesn't excuse what I did." "Apology accepted," I said. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." She nodded, her eyes wet. "I've learned. Believe me, I've learned." We sat in silence for a moment, then she said, "I heard the neighborhood is doing well. That makes me happy. I really did want to make it better, even if I went about it the wrong way." "It is doing well," I said. "People are happy. The HOA is working the way it should." She finished her food and stood up. "I should go. Thank you for talking to me, Sheriff. It means more than you know." I watched her leave, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served. The community had been protected and made whole, but there was still sadness in seeing how far she had fallen, even if it had been her own doing. Tom came over and sat down where Kathleen had been. "That was kind of you," he said. "Talking to her seemed like the right thing to do," I said. "She's paid her debt. No point in continuing to punish her." "That's what makes you a good sheriff," Tom said. "And a good neighbor. You know when to be tough and when to show mercy." As the party continued around us, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. It had started with a simple confrontation about a snowmobile, and had escalated into embezzlement charges, investigations, and community upheaval. But in the end, justice had prevailed, the community had grown stronger, and even the person who had caused all the trouble had been given a chance at redemption. That was how it should work. Not perfectly, because nothing involving humans was ever perfect. But fairly, with compassion and accountability balanced in appropriate measure. The winter deepened, and I continued my patrols, checking on Bill and the others who lived year-round in the mountains. The snowmobile carved tracks through fresh powder, and the peace of those early morning hours never got old. Sometimes I would stop on a ridge and just sit, watching the sun rise over the peaks, feeling grateful for the life I had chosen. Pine Ridge Estates settled into a comfortable routine. The HOA board met quarterly, handled the necessary business efficiently, and otherwise stayed out of people's way. Neighbors helped each other when needed but respected each other's privacy. It was, in many ways, an ideal community. One morning in late January, exactly 2 years after my first confrontation with Kathleen, I was checking on Bill's cabin when I noticed smoke coming from the chimney. That was normal, but something felt off. The snow around the cabin hadn't been cleared recently, and Bill's truck looked like it hadn't moved in days. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Bill, it's Marcus. Just checking on you." Still no answer. I tried the door and found it unlocked, which wasn't unusual for Bill but still concerning given the circumstances. I went inside and found him lying on the floor near the fireplace, conscious but unable to get up. "Bill, what happened?" "Fell yesterday," he said weakly. "Hurt my hip. Couldn't get to the phone." I immediately called for an ambulance and the rescue squad, then did what I could to make Bill comfortable. The rescue squad arrived within 30 minutes, impressive given how remote the location was, and they stabilized Bill for transport. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Bill grabbed my hand. "Thank you, Marcus. If you hadn't been doing your rounds, I might have died here." "Just doing my job," I said, but I felt shaken. If I hadn't been doing the early morning patrols, if Kathleen had succeeded in stopping me, Bill might have died alone in his cabin. That thought stayed with me as I followed the ambulance down the mountain and then drove to the hospital. Bill ended up being okay, with a fractured hip that required surgery but a good prognosis for recovery. But it had been close. When I got home that evening, I sat down and wrote an email to all the homeowners in Pine Ridge Estates, explaining what had happened and why the early morning patrols were important. I didn't mention Kathleen by name, but the implication was clear. The patrols weren't just about me enjoying my snowmobile. They served a legitimate public safety purpose. The responses I got were overwhelmingly supportive. Several people thanked me for my dedication. A few offered to help with the patrols if I ever needed backup. One person suggested we should formalize the arrangement and make it an official part of my duties as sheriff, possibly with budget support from the county. That last suggestion intrigued me. I reached out to the county commissioners and proposed a program where the sheriff's department would conduct regular wellness checks on remote residents during winter months. The commissioners loved the idea and approved a modest budget increase to cover fuel and equipment costs. What had started as a personal routine became an official program, benefiting not just the residents of my neighborhood but people throughout the county who lived in remote areas. We recruited and trained volunteers to help with some of the checks, created a database of residents who wanted regular contact, and established protocols for emergency situations. Bill recovered from his surgery and spent the rest of the winter in town, staying with his daughter. But he made me promise that when he returned to his cabin in the spring, the wellness checks would continue. "I like my independence," he said, "but I also like knowing that if something goes wrong, someone will find me before it's too late." As spring arrived again, marking the second anniversary of the HOA conflicts resolution, I reflected on everything that had happened. What had started as a petty dispute about noise had led to uncovering embezzlement, reforming an HOA, and ultimately creating a program that would save lives. Sometimes the most important outcomes come from unexpected sources. If Kathleen hadn't confronted me about the snowmobile, I might never have gotten involved with the HOA. The embezzlement might have continued for years. The community might never have come together and learned to function as a true neighborhood. And Bill Patterson might have died alone in his cabin, undiscovered for days or weeks. It was a strange thing to be grateful for conflict, but in this case, the conflict had led to positive change. Not just for me or for Pine Ridge Estates, but for the entire county. Tom called me one evening in April with news. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this. Kathleen applied to have her probation terminated early. Her lawyer says she's been a model citizen, paid back all the restitution ahead of schedule and completed way more community service hours than required." "Good for her," I said, and I meant it. "Is there going to be a hearing?" "Yeah, next month." The prosecutor's office asked if anyone from the neighborhood wanted to provide input. "I think most people are ready to let it go, but I wanted to check with you first." I thought about it. I don't have any objection. If she's genuinely turned her life around, she deserves a chance to move forward without the stigma of probation. "I'll let the prosecutor know," Tom said. The hearing happened in early May. I didn't attend, seeing no reason to, but Tom went as a representative of the HOA. He called me afterward to report. "The judge granted her request," he said. Kathleen gave a pretty emotional speech about what she had learned and how she had changed. Even the prosecutor didn't object. The judge said he was impressed by how she had exceeded all the requirements and seemed genuinely remorseful. "That's good," I said. "Everyone deserves a second chance." "She asked me to thank you," Tom said. "She said you could have made things much worse for her, but you didn't." She appreciated that. After hanging up, I thought about Kathleen and her journey. She had started as an antagonist, someone who had caused real harm to our community. But she had also been a person struggling with her own demons and making bad choices out of desperation. The justice system had held her accountable while also giving her a path to redemption, and she had taken it. That was how it should work. Accountability and redemption, justice and mercy, working together. As summer arrived, bringing tourists and sunshine to Whitefish, life in Pine Ridge Estates continued its pleasant rhythm. I shifted from snowmobile to hiking and truck for my patrols, checking on Bill and the others who had returned to their mountain homes. The wellness check program was working well, with volunteers helping to cover the vast area of remote properties in the county. One evening in June, I was having dinner at a local restaurant when I saw Kathleen walk in with a man I didn't recognize. She looked happy, healthier than when I had last seen her at the Christmas party. She noticed me and hesitated, then walked over to my table. "Sheriff Irving, I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," I said. "You look well, thank you. I wanted to introduce you to my friend Robert." "Robert, this is Sheriff Marcus Irving, the man I told you about." Robert shook my hand. "Kathleen's told me a lot about you, about how you handled a difficult situation with integrity. That's rare these days." "Just did what needed to be done," I said. "Kathleen, I heard your probation was terminated. Congratulations." She smiled and it looked genuine. "Thank you. It feels good to have that chapter closed. I'm working as an office manager now, much better than the call center, and Robert and I are talking about opening a bookstore together." "That sounds great," I said. "I wish you both the best." As they walked away to their table, I felt a sense of closure. The story that had begun with an angry confrontation in my driveway had ended with a brief, pleasant conversation in a restaurant. Kathleen had paid for her mistakes and rebuilt her life. The community had healed and grown stronger. Justice had been served, and mercy had been granted. That evening, as I drove home through the long summer twilight, I thought about all the lessons I had learned from the experience. About standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. About the importance of community and helping neighbors. About the difference between justice and revenge. About redemption and second chances. These were lessons that served me well in my work as sheriff and in my life as a citizen. They reminded me why I had chosen this career and this place to live. Montana was more than just beautiful scenery and outdoor recreation. It was a place where people still cared about their neighbors, where communities could come together to solve problems, and where both justice and mercy had a place. I pulled into my driveway as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Ranger was at the door, tail wagging, ready for his evening walk. The mountains loomed in the distance, eternal and unchanging, a reminder of what really mattered. This was home. This was where I belonged. And whatever challenges might come in the future, I knew I could face them with the same principles that had guided me through the HOA conflict. Integrity, compassion, commitment to justice, and respect for the community I served. The story of the HOA Karen who demanded I stop snowmobiling at dawn had become part of the local lore, told and retold in various forms. But for me, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder of why my work mattered, why community mattered, and why standing up for what's right, even in small things, could make a real difference in people's lives. As I walked Ranger through the peaceful streets of Pine Ridge Estates that evening, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. They had made me better at my job and better as a person. And they had helped create a community that I was proud to be part of, where people looked out for each other and worked together to solve problems. That was worth more than any amount of peace and quiet. That was what made a place worth living in.